Hey guys, welcome back. Today's topic is the matrix of consent. So, I know on the topic of just consent and slavery, really, I guess what got me started on all of this was this idea that everything is a contract and that I am the creator of my reality. And I had to go so far away from home. I had to go so deep into my own slavery to recognize the ways that I created it. I created it myself and how I was the one that could also create freedom for myself. So I like to take radical responsibility for my own life on how I created my own slavery and how we all can bring ourselves out too. So I know they've tricked us in so many ways though, where if we think we're free, but we're not really because we agreed to be in the cage and we didn't even realize it though. That's the craziest part. So really the most effective control is one where the prisoner doesn't even realize that the bars are there because they've agreed to be inside. So there are so many different ways in our lives we start realizing how we've agreed to be within this cage, or we've even just maybe even been groomed to believe that that's the safest for us rather than the freest or allowing freedom of opportunity. But yeah, no, I started recognizing my own cage that I created and had to start unpacking all of my own beliefs. It's not just the system that's created the cage, but we do it ourselves. And we've agreed to it on some level. On some level, a contract was offered, and on some level, we accepted it. And I'm not saying it's always a physical contract. There are many spiritual contracts too. So if you're breaking these spiritual contracts and physical contracts, this is a shift for the whole frequency of the earth, what you're doing right now. I just have to make a note of that. But I want to talk about what consent really means in law. So, in law, consent means a voluntary agreement to the proposal of another. But there's a catch because under the uniform the UCC, under the UCC, I always say that, yeah, the Uniform Commercial Code, you don't have to say yes out loud for it to be binding. That's the craziest thing. Your silence, your participation, and even just your behavior can equal acceptance. They call it an implied consent. And it starts before you can even speak, right? So every jurisdiction claims start with one thing, and that's going to be consent. So, first, an offer to contract, and then an acceptance of that contract. So, in the statutory system, consent or acceptance doesn't have to be spoken. It can be implied, it can be assumed, or even manufactured. This is honestly how millions live their entire lives, believing that they are bound by laws that in reality only apply if they've agreed to operate as a legal person. So this is really kind of where it comes into people saying like, but I thought I needed to register my baby. It says right here I'm required, and you don't realize who it actually applies to. So you start realizing different verbal contracts and language traps and all certain things on how they've tricked us. So have you ever had an officer ask, "Do you understand?" In everyday life, we all think, it means, "Do you comprehend this thing?" But in law, understand really means to stand under someone's authority. So the moment you answered yes, you've just formed a verbal contract agreeing to be within their jurisdiction. So words really are, you start realizing, the building blocks of legal agreements. If you say the wrong ones or you sign the wrong name, you've just entered into a binding arrangement and they'll enforce it. Okay. Language is everything. A contract doesn't need ink to bind you. It could be a nod, a handshake, a yes, even remaining silent when a claim is made. All can be taken as agreement and acceptance of an offer. So the statutory world runs on these implied contracts, and they don't need your knowledge. All they need is your failure to object, which is like so freaking genius. So genius, where you start realizing everything, is an offer to contract, and you get to decide what you do with that offer to contract. That offer you get to accept knowingly. You can stay silent and accept. You can argue and not accept, I guess. You have to knowingly not accept. You can counter offer, or you can do what's called a conditional acceptance, where you say, okay, I hear you if you can prove X, Y, and Z first. So, again, going into this whole concept of everything's a contract, everything's an offer, and you have to accept the offer. And so far, where we are within our slavery, we've all on some level accepted the offer. Okay, so here we are. Now we're coming through with eyes wide open. And really, we start realizing that jurisdiction is the power to make and enforce laws. And under the original written constitution, the one for we the people, like I was saying, for men and women, they recognize men and women as the source of authority. But the moment we identify as a US citizen or a parent, a doctor, or any other statutory label, we've just diminished ourselves and we've stepped down from our God-given standing of who we are, and we've stepped into a corporate role the moment we take on titles. Okay. And so in that role, our rights become privileges, and the privileges can be revoked. So, yeah, when we were born, the state doesn't, we know that. At this point in the series, you know that they didn't just record your arrival, they recorded it in a very specific way, and your parents were labeled as informants. And in that moment, a certificate was created, and you know that it wasn't to prove your existence, but to register you as a new asset. And now we know that registration is the act of transferring title into an official ledger. And once on that ledger, now you're part of the state's inventory, right? Hopefully by now that's all like sinking in. So for most of us, our first contract and the most important contract wasn't even signed by us. That's what we call an adhesion contract. The birth certificate is the registration of a new legal entity and that corporate name. So that name in all caps, we all know now that every contract and every statute applies to that person, that business that was created in our name, not the living man or woman. So the social security, of course, of course, the next layer, which we've taken the deep dive into, is that the 20 CFR 422.103 is issued to those only who are applying for benefits, which is a voluntary act on paper. But once it's issued, that number opens your lifetime of earnings record. That record isn't an asset just for the treasury, but it's for your future labor that can now be counted as collateral for the national debt. So, another way that they claim jurisdiction is through residency. Jurisdiction isn't just about like geography, it's about the status that you claim. So, a resident is legally someone who lives in a territory subject to control. Okay. A citizen is one who owes allegiance in exchange for protection. You check either box on a form and you've just consented to the corporate jurisdiction of the United States. Whether or not you say, that's how they trick you, right? Like, I'm a resident of whatever, I'm a citizen of, boom, jurisdiction. You use their address, boom, jurisdiction. We're going to talk about that in a second. So, even a US person is a legal term under the IRS code, and it pulls you into federal tax law with a single tick of a pen. Like the second you say or claim you are, now you're within jurisdiction. So in law, also a license isn't a right, it's permission to do something that would otherwise be illegal. So by applying, you enter into a contract with the issuing authority. That means you agree to follow their rules. If you want to drive with a license, now you're under motor vehicle code. If you want to marry with a license with a marriage contract, now the state becomes a third party beneficiary to your sacred union, where it was supposed to be a sacred union that you thought was just your spouse. Now you've actually just invited them as a party into your contract. So the Constitution, we know, was originally written for we the people, the living men and women, flesh and blood beings endowed with unalienable rights, not unalienable rights. They're unalienable, okay? rights by the Creator. But the moment we accept the status as a US citizen, parent, resident, driver, or doctor, whatever, any other statutory label, we've exchanged that divine title for a legal fiction. And in the legal world, that's how our rights became privileges, and the privileges can easily be taken away. So that's really where the jurisdiction trap comes in. It's the lawful rights that flow from natural law and the Constitution, they can't be legislated away. Legal privileges can, and they exist only within statutory codes and administrative regulations, and they apply to persons, which are the artificial entities created by the state. So they don't teach us the difference between lawful and legal. Okay. Again, I'm going to repeat that. The lawful is the natural law from God. Legal is created by statutes, codes, persons. Lawful, we the people, men and women. Legal, persons that have to abide by statutes and codes. So when you identify yourself as a US citizen rather than one of the people, we've opted into the statutory system by consent. And even if that consent was never explained to you. So, of course, like I said, they've tricked us with the language, they've changed the language. And I really had this like aha, like connecting of the dots moment when I realized like Latin. I never thought like how an entire language could die. How does an entire language die? Well, they came in and they brought in their own language, okay? They've changed the language. If you haven't, there's a book called Word Magic that I highly recommend everyone read, where it really goes into like the etymology and the word magic, the word spells. I mean, it goes way beyond not just these trickery, but how we're honestly casting spells and they're casting spells and we're doing their bidding essentially by the words we're using. So, yeah. Anyway, it's kind of crazy. It's crazy how they've changed the language so we forgot. Um, but yeah, once that point forward, when we've agreed to these word trickery, we abide by those statutes and codes, and those regulations apply to us because we've agreed to be recognized as an entity that they govern. So we start recognizing all the ways that our daily participation within the matrix is how we are creating this slavery. Every day that we step into this jurisdiction of the United States corporation without even thinking about it, it's by using Federal Reserve notes. Okay. All of that. Oh, man. Yeah. Anyway, when we vote, we're accepting the corporate governance structure of the United States when we're doing that. Even when we're sending a letter and we're writing an address and claiming residency with zip codes that are underneath United States, right? That address is connected to United States. So the moment you write that address, you're tying yourself to jurisdiction. So of course we have to be so aware how we're creating our own private records, how we're filling out these contracts so that we're not contracting ourselves within jurisdiction. They don't hide it, they just simply make participation so normal that we don't even question it. And of course, they do it in about a million different ways. So if we're aware of one way, they're trying to do it here too. So they're always trying to trick us into jurisdiction. Then of course, we've talked about the parents patriae, where the consent comes where the the state is the ultimate parent. And once within their jurisdiction, they claim the right to decide what's best for you and your children. And if you've signed those contracts and you've gotten licenses or you've accepted those benefits, now you've agreed to let them be. So, so now let's move beyond that. What happens if you don't register that name at all? What if you never get your little one a birth certificate? Well, without a birth certificate, there's no automatic creation of a legal fiction. You remain standing as a man or a woman and never as a corporate entity. Basically, you avoid that default enrollment as the 14th Amendment citizen, meaning statutory codes don't apply to you by assumption. You're not added to as the collateral pool backing the national debt. and the state can't claim parents' patriae guardianship by default. So the obligations like being drafted to war, automatic income tax liability, they don't automatically apply. It's the difference between starting life as a free being and being property of the state. I do want to make a note, though, that of course the state will assume jurisdiction, and it's up to you to enforce it and challenge that jurisdiction rather than just taking the burden of the claim. So, like I was saying earlier, when everything's an offer, say an alphabet agency comes to your house and they offer to contract, you either accept it because they are going to assume jurisdiction unless you challenge their jurisdiction. So that is the important part. Going this path of choosing not to have a birth certificate isn't going to make it so they don't challenge you. You have to challenge them back because they will assume. And they're going to hope that you stay silent or that you accept the contract. But you need to stand your ground that I've not accepted the contract. Prove to me you're a party in this contract. So really the matrix of consent is the invisible until you know the signs. Like I was saying, the birth registration, the licenses, the permits, claiming titles and diminishing who you are as a man or a woman. Every piece is designed to lock you into their jurisdiction and to keep you there. So the moment that you see it, and the moment that you reclaim your language and you become really intentional about your language and your contracts and your standing, the matrix totally cracks. And when it cracks, that's when you can walk out. So, whether you're expecting a baby or you're reclaiming your own sovereignty or both, your authority really comes down to the creator. It doesn't come from the government. Consent is the currency of control. So, the question isn't whether you've given it, the question is whether you'll keep giving it now that you know.